Hey, I'm Wendy, and this is my series, Love, Loss, and Lipstick. I'm sharing my love story bit by bit every week while I get ready for work. In this hot Tennessee heat, I always start with primer, so my makeup doesn't melt off by the end of the day. When I'm done putting my makeup on, today's story will end, and I'll pick up where I left off next week. Last week, I talked about when my husband moved to Nashville and left my daughter and me in California. And we finally got to visit. She and I went and visited after about 3 months. And that was rough. So really, he missed her first steps. He missed her first Halloween, which was right before we went to see him. He missed Thanksgiving and Hanukkah. Every year at Christmas, since I was in high school, I always went to one of my best friend's house and celebrated with her family. And so I took Marin, and Steve had been going with me prior years, but anyway, so he missed that. I took Marin to the Rose Parade, and then it was my birthday. I took her to the beach, to the movies for the first time, although we went to see Aladdin, so it was Disney, so he probably wouldn't have gone with us anyways. But regardless, I took her to the Kings game. I took her to the Dodgers games. Took her a lot of places. And I was really getting tired of feeling like a single parent. I did not sign up for that. And every time I talked about us finally, moving there, he kept saying, no, I'm not ready. Everything has to be perfect. I'm not going to move you away from, everything you have and put you in an apartment somewhere and have you, start to resent me. And he probably wasn't wrong, but it was really hard. So he promised he would be home for her daughter's second birthday, which was July. He came home briefly in the spring. We were there in October. He came home for a quick visit in the spring, but he did promise that he would be home for her birthday. And he was. And we had made the decision that there was no way we were going to leave California without taking Marin to Disneyland. So even though we were still very bitter about what happened with Disney, and he still, swore that we would never do or have Disney anything, we took our daughter to Disneyland for her birthday, and we had a great time. And she was only 2, but it was good. It was all good. So that was during the summer, and then it was about, August, September, October, 4 months. December was the next time that he was able to come home. And so he was working in Nashville, but like I said, now we had 2 households that we were trying to support. I was working as much as I could, and I had a lot of support, but, I remember just crying on the phone about just not wanting to be a single parent and how hard it was to do everything. And I didn't want to walk up the stairs again. And I didn't want to change another diaper again. And I didn't want to, and it killed him because he's Mr. Helper, help everybody. and the fact that he couldn't help me. And really, I had to remind myself he was there, he was doing his best, and he had nobody. He was there by himself. He had no support system. I mean, he, had a couple friends and some work acquaintances. And I knew he was doing his best, but I had to vent. I had to vent to somebody. I mean, who else? Besides my mom. But he came home in December. I had found out I wanted to put the house on the market. I wanted to get the ball rolling. I was done. I was coming whether he liked it or not. And so we had done the math and we knew what we paid for our house. We paid $225 and we put about $12,000 into it. It was a new house, and so we built some patios and pergola and did some landscaping. And so we spent about $12,000 when we moved in to get it up to, what we wanted. And so we thought, okay, we'll list it for $240. That sounded like a good, fair price. We really just wanted to get our money out of it. And this was California, So, but he was, he's like, not yet, not yet, not yet. Well, I made the decision that by the end of the year, I was putting the house on the market, whether he was ready or not, because who knew how long it was going to take to sell. So I told him, I was going to contact a realtor and just start. I had to. So in California, for those of you who don't know, the real estate market goes in cycles. Really, it's volatile. I mean, we bought when it was high. We paid full asking price. And we didn't even realize that it was on the downslide. And we were upside down in our mortgage. So we owed more than what the house was worth. And we had no money. So we really needed to get our money. We had worked so hard to come up with that money for our down payment and wanted to get it back. Sorry. But that wasn't going to happen. So we talked to a lawyer, and I mentioned in one of my other weeks, I feel like we got really bad advice because he told us to file for bankruptcy. And then we found out later, I think if you file for bankruptcy, there's a way to protect your house. And that, of course, was our biggest debt. Anyways, so backing up, Steve came home in December because we had to go to court. We had to go to bankruptcy court. And our lawyer told us, at this point, to just stop making the payments. And that was awful. That was awful. But, why throw good money after bad, I guess. Anyways, so what was I gonna say? Sorry. Steve ended up staying a little bit longer this trip. The production company kind of shuts down over the holidays, and so this was December. And early January, we were awakened by that rolling feeling, earthquake. It was like 4:30 in the morning, and the house starts shaking. Of course, we'd been through plenty of earthquakes. And I always felt like by the time I get up, it's gonna stop. So we just kind of laid in bed for a minute and it wasn't stopping. And so I sat up and it wasn't stopping. And I ran to the doorway thinking, surely it's gonna stop, and it didn't stop. So I ran into my daughter's room and she was sitting, I can still see it. She was sitting up in her crib and it was like banging against the wall. And she's just sitting there. And I thought, oh my gosh, I grabbed her and ran back. We stand in the doorway. That's just what we were taught, if it's right or wrong. And it felt like it lasted forever. And then finally it stopped. So we turned on the news. And I mean, it felt like we were the epicenter as hard as it was shaking. But it turns out the epicenter was in the valley, the other valley, about an hour away from us, where my in-laws lived and where my family, I have aunts, uncles, cousins, everybody, they're all out there. So Steve called his mom and my father-in-law answered the phone in tears. And so not only were they terrified, but their house was a wreck. And then come to find out, my aunt and uncle, the parents of my cousins who introduced me and Steve, their house had a lot of damage too. So Steve ended up staying longer. Nashville was having an ice storm at the same time, so everything was shut down. So him being in California wasn't keeping him from working or doing anything, but he was actually able to help his family, help my family. And he stayed until, I think it was probably the end of February. And when I was at work one day, one of my clients told me I should ask Bank of America if they would do a short sale, which I didn't know what that was. I mean, we were asking $188 for our house. We owed $180, but we didn't want to, leave owing money on our house. So anyways, she's like, yeah, we were able to get a like $300,000 short sale. And I thought, oh my gosh. So I asked them if they would do a short sale, and they said no. And I'm like, are you kidding? I said, you want my house back instead of, working with us? And they pretty much said, yeah. So that was when we stopped making payments on the house. And Steve had gone back, and I couldn't stay any longer. I started telling my customers that I was leaving, started deciding who I was going to give all my clients to, and I was making arrangements. And Steve was like, I'm not ready. And I'm like, too bad, we're coming. I mean, it just felt yucky to be living in that house. And our attorney's like, oh, the eviction process takes several months. And I'm like, oh, I would die. I wanted to be gone before that happened. It was awful. But anyway, so Steve was back in Nashville. And I told you about our friends, the one I met in my pregnant aerobics class, and how they had bought a house in Hendersonville. And when I went to visit, she drove me out there to see it, and it was on a lake, and Steve couldn't understand why anybody would move to Hendersonville because you couldn't even get there, because he didn't know that there was a bypass now. And so you could get there. But they had been inviting him to come over for dinner, and he was not really social, and so he had declined several times. But finally, he's like, okay. And he told me he was going to go to Jim and Regina's for dinner. And so he went, and they were talking and having conversations, and they mentioned the house next door to them had been sitting vacant And he's like, well, what's the deal with that? And they said that the woman who owned the house, her job moved her to Kentucky, that she never wanted to get rid of her house because her plan was when she retired that she wanted to come back. And I'm not sure, it was years. She still had like, at the time, she had like 10 years left to work. So she was renting out her house. And the last tenants that she had trashed it and left. So she couldn't rent it out in the condition that it was in, but she couldn't afford to do all the work on it that it needed. So Regina told Steve, you know, he was like, wow, you know, I wonder if I could make some kind of a deal. And she said, well, I have a key. She gave them a key in case, just to keep an eye in case of an emergency or if any reason that she needed to have a key. So she's like, yeah, you know, do you want to see it? So she walked him over there and went to see the house. And of course, Regina had her contact info. And so Steve called her and he asked if she wanted, you know, to rent it out to somebody. And she said, yeah. And of course explained how, you know, it needed so much work. And he said, well, what if we did all the work, you know? He said, if you'll rent it to us for what you're paying on it, you know, your mortgage, your insurance, you know, whatever it's costing you a month. And he said, if you will pay for the big stuff, like paint, or if it needs new carpet, which it did. Some of the appliances, maybe, I think, yeah, I don't remember. But anyways, he said if there's, you know, big ticket items, that, you know, you pay for those, it's your house. It's not something that we would take with us, you know, when we go. But, you know, could we do that? And would you be interested? And she said, yes. She said, that sounds great. Setting spray is a must. I pay $600 a month for my mortgage and my insurance. So if you'll rent it, if you'll pay me $600 a month, it's yours. So we had like a 3,000 square foot home, 2 acres on a lake for $600 a month. So I told Steve, we're coming May 15th, ready or not. And that's where I'm stopping for today. I'm ready to go to work. If you ever have any questions about anything I use, just ask, and you guys have a great day. I will upload this to my YouTube channel because Facebook will delete it. And Wendy Angus, Wendy with an IE, and I will see you next week.